Welcome, everybody. We are going to learn about Collections Databases 101, but also a really awesome database that the Alutiiq Museum has created. Is it Amutat? Amutat?
Amutat.
Okay, Amutat. Okay, so Amanda is our speaker today. Thank you so much, Amanda. Amanda is a museum professional with 8 years of experience managing museum collections. She holds a master's degree in history from Texas Tech University with a graduate certificate in museum studies. And in 2017, she joined the staff at the Alutiiq Museum in Kodiak, Alaska. And she currently serves as the Curator of Collections. And her expertise is in collections management, NAGPRA repatriation, museum policies, copyright, and intellectual property and facility management. So lots of things. And today she's going to share with us her love of collections databases, which is awesome.
Thank you.
I'll let you get there.
I do love databases. I am hyper organized. I love organization and standardization. So databases really scratch that itch for me. So we're going to talk about collections management systems and databases. Ooh, let me get my slide deck up real quick. Share screen. Can everyone see the slide deck? Awesome. Yeah, Dixie, you're the only person I can see, so I'm going to rely on you. All right. So what is a collections management system? It's a database or software that assists primarily museum collections staff with object tracking and storing provenance information in electronic format. It can be used by other departments, but primarily it's for collections staff, at least in my experience. And the way you store your records in your CMS should somewhat mirror the way that your physical records are stored as well. So aside from just being used to collect or to track objects, they can also be used to prepare exhibits, track loans, and in our case, track repatriations, and also serve as an archaeological site database. All right. So what are the requirements for a CMS? You need 3 things. You need hardware, software, and a network. So the hardware is just the equipment that you use to access your collections management system. So that's just your laptop or your computer. The software is the collections management program that you use. It could be downloaded to your computer like as a program that you pay a license fee, or it could be a browser-based system where you log in and it's tied to the internet. Some of these names are probably familiar to you: PastPerfect, FileMaker Pro, Collective Access, even Microsoft Excel or Access can be used really effectively. And then the network is how you use your hardware to access your software. So that could be a local server that is housed in your facility that everything is connected to, or it could be a cloud server. And in that case, your server is based somewhere else. That might be in a different country, and you use the internet to access your browser-based system that way. So those are kind of the main requirements that you need for a CMS. Collections management systems, there are different database structures, but the 2 that I'm going to mostly focus on are flat file and relational. The flat file consists of a single table. So this is like a spreadsheet, like an Excel spreadsheet. It can also just, I mean, when you think about just sort of a basic flat file, it could also even just be like a handwritten list of like phone numbers, addresses, and names. So even that is just it's a flat file. Relational databases are a little more complex, and we'll talk about those a little more in depth here in a second. Let me swap my screen really quick so I can show you. You may use both types of databases. So we use, sorry, I'm not very adept at screen sharing. Huh. It doesn't want to let me. Okay, well, that's weird. Never mind then.
You have to share your whole screen instead of just sharing like a one page, I guess, because you can have different tabs up on one screen, but you have to share your whole screen, not just the PowerPoint or whatever. If that makes sense.
Here we go. All right. So this is an example of a flat file database that we use. This is just our master register. Let's see. Here. This is just our master accession register. So it's got a lot of data, but it's pretty simplistic. It just has the accession number, the name of the collection, donor, source, what type of collection it is, where it's located, and just a brief description. So for sort of simple data like that, this is really great. But there are disadvantages, and you can see here, I sort of simplified it. I just pulled a couple lines in here. So you can see that when here owner/lender, all of these are the same, but these two are different. And so if I go in here and I search for USFWS for US Fish and Wildlife, it works really great, except these two things aren't going to show up because they weren't entered correctly. So there's some problems with flat file. The advantages are it's simple to create, easy to use, and it's inexpensive. But the disadvantages are there's increased data redundancy. Like I had to type this each time, and the opportunity for error is just greater there. It's also inexpensive. All you really need with this is a Microsoft Office subscription. So put those away there. Where did my screen go? Thank you for bearing with me as I figure out share
No
screen.
problem. There it is.
There we go. All right. So after you, let me back up just a little bit and talk more about the advantages of a relational database. So the relational database is what a lot of these programs that you're probably familiar with are, like PastPerfect, FileMaker Pro, Collective Access, which is what we use. And it's a database that's comprised of multiple record types and multiple data sets. So it contains records, attributes, and importantly, relationships. And the relationships part is really key. It can also be multiple databases that interact. So you might have a database that's a donor database, and that interacts with your object collection database, your storage location database, et cetera. So the advantages of that: reduced data redundancy, good consistency, and linked records. The disadvantages, it does take a little bit of time to set up, and they can be more expensive. So just to talk a little bit more about some of the advantages of relational databases. So you have the linked records. And so essentially this means that when you go in and you create a record, so say you have a collection that comes in and it's an excavation and it's land that belongs to US Fish and Wildlife. So this collection belongs to US Fish and Wildlife and it's on loan to us. Well, that's connected to the entity record for US Fish and Wildlife. So then if I'm looking for other material that relates to US Fish and Wildlife, I can just go to that one record and it will point me to other things that relate to US Fish and Wildlife within our collection. So like I said, our database serves as our archaeological site database. So it will bring up all of the sites that US Fish and Wildlife owns. If they funded any of our archives, which they did, it will show up. If there are any library materials that they contributed to, that will show up as well. So it's really neat because it sort of builds this world around an object, and it's a world that you can navigate. So you can see how entities and objects and places all interact together. And it really gives you a much more comprehensive view of your collection. And it's really neat. The other really good advantage of relational databases is the reduced data redundancy. So for example, when you create an accession lot with a donor noted, all the object records nested underneath that lot will also be affiliated with that donor. So if you make a collection that is owned by US Fish and Wildlife, all of the objects within that collection also are noted as being owned by US Fish and Wildlife. And then when you go in and change information in that entity record, so say I need to go in and change the phone number for US Fish and Wildlife or something like that, or I realize I have a typo in the name or something, I just go into one record and correct it, and it corrects it everywhere. So it really helps with sort of that, integrity of the database and making sure that things stay consistent. The cardinal rule of a good database structure is that no piece of information should be entered more than once. So in that accession register, the Excel spreadsheet I showed you, I had to type in US Fish and Wildlife every single line. Well, I don't have to do that with a relational database. I just have to link them. So now we'll talk about sort of selecting your software. So the most important thing is just to sit down and really realistically think about the needs and restrictions of your organization. So there may be a system that you've seen demoed at a conference and you think it's really cool, but it may not work for where you are. It may not work for what what your situation is. So when I first started at the Alutiiq Museum, we used a program that it was a software that you downloaded to your computer. You paid a license fee for each user. So we had one license fee and we had it on one computer. It was a very old computer. It had to be plugged in all the time for it to work. If anything had happened to that computer, all the data would have been lost. It was also difficult because much of our staff couldn't access it. We have staff members that don't live on Kodiak. My supervisor lives outside of Anchorage. So she had no way of accessing collections records, and she's our chief curator, so she really needed it. And so when I came on board, they tasked me with finding a new collections management system. And so we sat down and talked about what we really needed, what our restrictions were, and what would be the best fit for us. And we came up with a list of things that were sort of non-negotiable. One was that we needed a system that could be used by other staff, including staff that didn't live on island. So for us, that seemed like a browser-based system where people could have individual logins and log in from wherever they were. We also wanted a system without a license fee for each user, because we needed 6, 7, 8 users to be able to use the system. We also wanted something that was good for archaeological collections. We have collections that are 20,000 pieces or more. So we needed a system that was going to be really good about tracking individual objects in very, very large collections. And then we knew that eventually we wanted to make our database publicly accessible. So we wanted something that had the ability to do that. I will go through our database here in a minute, but just I'll just stick to the slideshow for now. And then when it's done, we'll go over. So your database can be as robust or minimalist as you like. You want something that's going to fill your needs, not just the system you think you should have. It should work for you and the collection that your institution manages. On a shoestring budget, I've seen Microsoft Access used very effectively with even registration photos present. I worked at an institution that had no budget and also no database or no inventory. And so I just started a Microsoft Access database, and it just started from there. And so that's something. So if you're in a small staff in a remote area, maybe a collections management system that's downloaded to one computer and networked on a local server is best. But that means you have to keep good backups, and you have to make sure you're taking care of your hardware. So make sure you've got a good, virus protection subscription. Make sure you're careful with your laptop. If you drop it and it breaks and you don't have a good recent backup, then you've lost a lot of data. If you're in a bigger city, maybe you're in Anchorage and you have a larger staff that needs access, or staff in different geographical locations, you might want to look at a browser-based system with personalized logins. These are available online and to more people, but that means you also have to worry about data security and integrity. You also want to make sure your program is compatible with the software, with the hardware you have. So if you get a software program that takes up a lot of space on your computer, and you have a computer that's, just doesn't have a lot of space on it, that's not going to work very well for you. So when you're getting your system set up, you want to think about if you want a commercial system or if you want to have one specifically developed for your institution. So you can just purchase database systems that are already set up, or you can work with the developers to sort of customize it for you. And that's what we ultimately did with Collective Access. Most of our projects are grant funded, and so we have just written in funding for the developers of Collective Access, which is Whirligig, to help us develop all the different records that we wanted, because we had really specific wants and needs. So one of the really great things that we were able to do in our database was to create a custom controlled vocabulary for specialized Alutiiq tool types. So, they have built-in ones. They have Getty, Art and Architecture, Thesaurus, and those have lots of objects, but they don't have the wide variety of Alutiiq tool types that we wanted. There aren't just harpoons. There are toggling harpoons and non-toggling harpoons and barbed harpoons. And these specialized tool types just weren't available in those controlled vocabularies. We have that controlled vocab, the Getty, available in our database, but we also have a one that we have created with very specific tool types. Having a customized system also allowed us to set up a field for indicating sacred objects, which helps us follow our spiritual care guidelines, as well as a field for salvage priorities, which helps us with our emergency prep. Having a field for indicating sacred objects was really important for us, because you can run reports and it shows you which objects aren't, if you're having a researcher visit and they have requested these objects, I can run a report and say, yep, these are all great. Here's where they're located. Oh, that one is marked as sacred. Now I need to take a step back and consult our spiritual care guidelines, talk to our executive director, see what we, see if that piece is accessible for the researcher or if it's just not. And so that allows us to follow our spiritual care guidelines a lot better than, we would be otherwise. There are modules that we don't use, and I'll show you those when we get into our database, that might be great for other institutions. We are not, when you think about archives, I always think about like people's papers, like their diaries or their letters. We have some of those, but when I think about our archives, they are more archives that deal with museum projects, archaeological surveys, or just projects that the museum has done. So it's a kind of a different type of archive. And so I haven't really gotten into putting our archives into this database yet. But if you are someone that is sort of a more traditional archival institution, I think this is actually a really good system for that. And we'll look at that here in a minute. The other one that we don't use, but I'm starting to play around with, is the exhibits. You can kind of you can create exhibit records and then tie objects to the exhibit. And it's really neat because, with our exhibit manager, we can kind of collaborate. Like she'll put in the objects that she wants to put into this particular display, and I can review them and say, yep, this all looks good. That object, I don't think it's in good enough shape. I think maybe we should find another piece that will do the same job. You can also run reports from search results. So for example, if you are wanting to do a spot inventory in cabinet A, shelf 1, you can run a report and it will pull up everything that should be in that shelf. Then you go in there, you do your inventory, you see one that's missing, you try to figure out what happened. Did it accidentally get moved to another shelf? Maybe it's on display, maybe it's on loan, but you're able to sort of catch those issues faster. Let's see. So like I said, most of our collections management system building has been done through grant funded projects. So we always carve out funding to work directly with the developers, and we just do this little chunks at a time. So one of the most recent updates was the development of a repatriation database within our CMS. It can connect to archaeological sites, tribes, library materials, and object collections or archives. A current grant that we have will have me working with the developers of Collective Access to make that system, that repatriation module, accessible to our local tribal administrators so that they can see information relevant to their community on pending, potential, and completed repatriations. I was talking to Dixie a minute ago about how that's one of my biggest complaints about NAGPRA is just that it's difficult to find a central database where there is a place where you can find repatriations, but it's really hard to find a central location where you can tell what repatriations have been completed. So we're doing this for our area so that tribes can access this and see what is available for being claimed, what has not been, what has been. And so just trying to make it a lot easier for tribes to see what is available for repatriation. Another benefit of browser-based systems with login access control is that you could have remote volunteers or even researchers use your database system. That's one of the things during COVID. We had people that wanted to do work, but they were, all over the place. And so we could set up access controls that would allow them to go in and fill out metadata about photographs to do a lot of work for us, but they don't have the ability to see certain things. They don't have the ability to delete records or delete the system, for example. And so those kind of systems are really nice for that. All right. So after you have selected your software, then you want to implement it. And one of the most important things to do before you sort of finalize your project and say you're done, you really want to let the people that will use the system day to day test it so that they can see like what works and what doesn't. You don't want your system to make people's lives harder. The point is to make their lives easier. So if they're having to try to do things differently to try to get the same result, then it's not really helping. You want to come up with data standards. So think about what fields are always going to be required and how you're going to fill them out. So do you always use centimeters? Do you always use inches? When you put people's names in, do you do last name first name last? think about what your data standards are going to be and make sure everyone that's using the system is familiar with that and uses them the same. That's where these controlled vocabularies can come in handy, is making sure everyone's using the same consistent language. The next thing I would do is to do like a written procedures or a manual for using your CMS. And this would detail information like when records are added. Do you do it pre-accession or do you wait until after they're accessioned? Who can do that? Can only the registrar do that, or can any collection staff add records? Can they modify records? How do you add fields? So if you have a controlled vocabulary that has materials, but one day you realize they don't have feathers and you need to add feathers, how do you do that? So making sure all of that is available. This is also a really good onboarding document. So when you have new staff come on, you can just sort of hand it to them and show them how to use it. It also helps if the person that chose, developed, and primarily used the system leaves the organization without really getting a chance to show new people how to use it. This manual is very helpful. The other thing with your implementing your CMS is you want to make sure you've got security and backup methods, which we sort of talked about earlier. Databases must be carefully managed so that records are not duplicated, accidentally deleted, or information shared that's not meant to be shared, especially with these browser-based programs where 50 people might have a login. You have to make sure that records aren't getting deleted or modified on accident, or that the records aren't being used for unauthorized purposes. One thing that we really like about collective access, and I think many programs probably do this, is that it leaves a log of activity. So if I go into a collection and I'm like, that's so weird, the donor is missing, some information looks kind of weird, I can go to the log of activity and see that, oh, I accidentally deleted the donor, or you can kind of backtrack and figure out what went wrong and fix it. Oh, the other thing it can do is it can provide checksums. So this is not something that we use very fully yet, but I would like to. So when you upload media, so when you're uploading your photos or audio clips or whatever, it automatically assigns checksums. And if you're unfamiliar with checksums are just a way to maintain file integrity. So you take a folder and there's programs that you can run, and what it will do is it'll assign a chain of numbers to each file. And then the next time you open that folder, you can check the checksums and it will tell you if anything in that folder has changed. Like if a file got deleted or if a file is corrupt, it will tell you that. So this does the same thing in your collections management system. So if you upload a photo, it automatically does a checksum for that photo, which is nice. We don't use that yet, but I would really like to. And then the last thing is consistency. When you're training new staff, just make sure everyone is on the same page. Make sure that it's very clear how important it is to really do excellent work when you're inputting data. So for example, if you misspell something and then you're assisting a researcher and you can't find the thing you're looking for because whoever input the information didn't spell something correctly, then you're not really serving your community with excellence, which is what we all want to do. So, if someone comes in and they're looking for photos of the village where their grandmother was raised and you're spelling it correctly, but whoever input it did not spell it correctly, then you're not finding the information that you're looking for, and you're not really helping the researcher the best way that you could. Oh, great. So then types of online access. That's one great thing about these collections management programs, is that you can make your collections accessible. And you can do that either by making your entire collection available, online collections, or you can do curated online exhibits. And that is sort of what Amutat is. And that will lead me into talking about this Amutat database. Right. There are Alutiiq cultural materials in museums around the United States and Europe. Following Western contact, visitors to Kodiak collected Alutiiq tools, clothing, and artwork and took them to distant places. Towards the end of the 20th century, Alutiiq culture bearers began visiting these treasures and bringing information about them back home. Using these pieces as inspiration, Alutiiq artists began replicating and then creating unique pieces themselves. It is difficult, time-consuming, and costly to visit many of these museums. The Alutiiq Museum had the idea to create a central clearinghouse where someone could visit many Alutiiq objects from around the world in one place. The database is called the Amutat database. Amutat means things to pull, and we chose this name for the database as it pulls together items from many collections. Oops. In 2019, with funding from the BIA and the Shunak tribe, the Alutiiq Museum worked with Whirligig to create a database within our CMS that would allow a curated selection of Alutiiq historic ethnographic objects to be displayed on our publicly accessible website. We developed the backend record, which looks like an abbreviated object record, and designed the landing page. Then Whirligig helped us import the collection records of objects at the Alutiiq Museum. We started with objects in our own collection to pilot the database. The record has a field for object name in English and Alutiiq, object identifier, materials, dimensions, provenance, age, tradition, and a place for an audio clip of the word being spoken in Alutiiq. It is linked to the museum who the collection belongs to. There's also a field to link the object directly to an object record at its home institution if they have theirs online as well. If not, the museum record page has a link to the museum's homepage. So it's always very clear which collections belong to which. In 2022, we received funding from Tanganak Native Village and BIA to expand the Amutat database. With this funding, we are visiting 6 Alaska museums with Alutiiq cultural materials to document these objects and make them available on our website. We started with our good partners across the street at the Kodiak History Museum and uploaded information on around 70 objects. So these are some of our participating institutions so far. These are some that we've already visited and some that we are planning on visiting in the coming months. So let me hop back over so I can show you our actual system here. Okay, Dixie, can you now see my the database instead of the slideshow?
Mm-hmm.
Great, perfect. All right, so this is sort of the landing page for our database. You can sort of customize your page however you like. I like having this random object come up. That makes me very happy. And then recently created items. You can get a quick snapshot of all the different objects in your collection, different entities, things like that. So here's our Amutat landing page. So this is what's available on our website. So if you go to our website right now, you can get to this page right here. You go into research and Amutat database. And so this just sort of gives a brief description of what it is, why there are Alutiiq objects around the world, and then you can search either by institution or by objects. And here's a cute little map that has pens wherever we know that there are Alutiiq cultural materials. So you can see they are all over the world. So you can navigate by either find institution or find objects. So say you're going to the East Coast and you want to see if there are any museums around there that might have Alutiiq objects that you could visit. You can look by institution. You can also search by objects. So say you're looking specifically, you want to look at masks specifically, then this is a good place to just go. Or if you're looking for baskets, there's lots of baskets. So there's different ways to navigate it. So like I mentioned earlier, we visited the Kodiak History Museum earlier this year and put their objects up on the Amutat database. And so this is a Kamlaika that is at the Kodiak History Museum. You can hear the audio clip. I don't know if this will work, but I'll try it. So very nice. So it's got the audio clip of the word being spoken in Alutiiq. You can see which museum it belongs to. That is the identifier for the Kodiak History Museum. It's not an identifier that we gave the object. It has the material, the dimensions, age, tradition, a credit line, and then any provenance that the museum chooses to share with us. And there are many different photos. So you can really get in there and see some detailed pictures of these. You can zoom in. But with each institution, we created our own, like a unique services agreement that really dealt with each institution's concerns. So, if there were copyright issues, we, wrote that into there, just anything that was important to the other museum that we were working with. So this is the back end. So this is where we actually input the records to make this accessible. So you can see the photo, we've done the object identifier, the object name. There's where we uploaded the audio clip and the field for the word in Alutiiq. Here's where we can toggle on or off the accessibility to the public. Here are the materials, dimensions, provenance, and then right here is the external link. So when the Kodiak History Museum has their database up, I will be able to go in and just add a link so that someone looking at this on the public page here, let's go back here. Oh my gosh, how did I get back? Well, never mind. But you can put a link in there that would take them directly to the Kodiak History Museum. So it's always very clear which objects belong to which collection. Let's see. So that's just another way to view. You can go directly to the Kodiak History Museum and see all the different objects that are in their collections. So, yeah. Great. So that is what I had to say about the Amutat database. Do we have any questions? If not, I can kind of go back and talk more about our database. I had a hard time sort of toggling back and forth between the screens, but I'm happy to sort of go through and show you.
Linda had a question. Let me see. Oh, trying to get rid of that. Okay, there we go. Are the records for the objects in the other museums in the same database as the Alutiiq Museum objects, or they're in a different database?
So really the only records that we have from the other museum is just whatever is on this page. So we go visit them, we get the dimensions, we get this information from them, usually in an Excel spreadsheet, so a flat file database, but we don't have like necessarily the paper records. We don't have their deed of gift or anything like that, if that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. And are you guys taking the pictures that you're putting on your database?
Mm-hmm. Yep, we are taking the photos. I think at one institution that we're visiting in the spring, they already have photos and they're just going to give us their photos. But for all of the other organizations, we've been taking photos ourselves.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is funded through a grant?
It's funded through BIA, and it's like a tribal pass-through. So Shunak Tribe received funding from BIA to set this up, and now to sort of expand it, we're working with one of the other tribes.
Nice.
Yeah.
I have another question. This is based on talking to Selena about, I think she's really interested in work too, but she says part of the reason is because she is able to say, you know, only women can look at this, or only men, or there's a lot of different things you can do with that system. Can you do the same thing with this one?
Mm-hmm. Yep, you sure can. There is, let me get back to my, so these are like our individual, like our records. So let's see, if we were to go to create new object, we'll say ethnographic object. Oh no, please don't go slow. Okay, here we go. So I will just add, I'll just put patterns. Oops. So if I create this object, all of a sudden more fields are going to show up here on the left. And so I can go to condition care. And this is going to give me right here in this field cultural care. So if this isn't something that's meant to be only handled by women, I can write that in there.
Mm-hmm.
Teal, you had your hand raised.
Okay, hi. So I had a couple questions, and when I was first starting in this field, I took a bunch of different webinars, little classes on collections, mainly because this has been a big goal of mine for the last 4 or 5 years, is to organize ours, and things just get pushed back, and we're finally applying for another person to hopefully take on some of my duties so that way I can focus on museum stuff. But let me get my hand down. Apparently I can't do 2 things at once. There we go. A lot of I guess there were a lot bigger organizations or places than our smaller museum, but they all had such a long checklist of things that they had to do when they accessioned an item, and a lot more paper copies and stuff. I was just curious if, so you guys have either your online or your database that's on the server, but are you also keeping files for each person like on the server? And then are you also having like every time you add a new person or a new item, are you also, filling that out maybe on the computer, but also printing that off and creating its own file, physical file? And then, yeah, I'm just curious of, you were saying how to make it easier and also not wanting to make your work harder on your employees. And I'm just kind of curious as to like, what's kind of enough for each or what's too much, I guess, and where that's enough. And then also my other question was, you guys are kind of unique in the way that you really only have to deal with like, the Alutiiq Museum items. For us, we are, as the Native Village of Yaak, we do represent primarily four diverse cultures. But we were such a melting pot, around the last turn of the century, or 1900s, that there's just different cultures there involved. And so I find it hard to be able to find a way to be like culturally responsive and respectful, and like when can we keep these items together, or when should we keep these items together, and how it goes about and how that's like really shown in like the databases, I guess I should say, especially when it comes to like some Eyak artifacts that are have like a lot of Tlingit influence, or like say they're from the Katella or Chilkat, where it's like pretty central in between the two cultures. Like, I don't know, this has just kind of been something I've been mulling over, and if you had any insight on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll address the first one. So I am obsessed with data, like having redundant copies everywhere. Like I have backups upon backups upon backups. So I probably go overboard. So I'm going to tell you how I do things, and it may be a little extra. But we have a cloud server, and on that cloud server, we have all of our accession registers. So for every accession lot that comes in, I create a file record. It's like AM 1049. And then there may be 1, 2, 500 objects within that accession. That accession register is mirrored on a local server. So in case, our local server broke down or something, I've still got it on the cloud server. I also have a paper copy. So that's that black metal cabinet right behind me. And there are more in the collections room. This is just the one that I brought with me into my new temporary office. And so the accession register, so those collection records are in 3 different places. Additionally, with any collection that has a lot of digital assets, so language recordings, photo collections, things like that, where the object is the digital asset, I also have those on a master hard drive. So like just one of those, I normally have them everywhere. So something like this, I have the digital assets on because those are the actual objects. So like those language recordings are so important. So I have them updated everywhere. So I have them backed up everywhere. And then I also have a dark archive that goes to Amy in Anchorage. So I have way more backups than I think is probably necessary. But to answer your question, I have all of those. And there are ways that you could simplify that. So you could do, we use Box, which is a cloud server, but I know there are ways that Box will sync with a local server. It's just not something I've done. But in that situation, you would update your records on Box, and it would also update them on your local server. So you're not having, what I do is I have a setting on Box where if anyone adds information to a collections record, I get an email. And so then I know to go and add that. So like maybe, hi. So maybe Amy adds a report to an archaeological excavation archive, and she uploads it to the Box server. Well, now I know I need to go and grab that and put it also in the local server and maybe print it. I just I get a feel for if it's something that really needs to be printed or not. Legal paperwork, things like that, I always do. But if it's just like a report or something or correspondence, I might not. So I have it backed up in lots of different places. Does that answer the first part of your question?
Oh.
Okay.
Yes, it does. One thing that I did always see too is that they had really like duplicate paperwork. So you had to fill out this piece of paper for this, but then you're kind of having to do, oh my gosh. You just honked the horn when somebody is driving or walking right by. Don't do that. Sorry. And then, so that just seemed really excessive. And I agree with like, having it on the computer, having those folders on the computer, on the server and in person, and also having like a piece of paper of the accession or the accession paperwork or whatever, like with the item, like in the box or whatever. But yeah, it was just, there's a lot of documents and I try to create something that was simplified, but also one thing that I really hate about all of the records is that it doesn't answer any questions. It doesn't tell you what it was used for. It doesn't tell you who used it. It doesn't tell you anything culturally related or the history of the item. And so that's one thing that I'm battling with our stuff. And so yeah, I don't know. I'm like, don't honk. I'm liking how your system is showing online and being able to. Okay, stop that, please. It's honking again. And being able to do that. But yeah, so that answered that. And I think things are just different for every museum, I guess. Stop honking.
And then to address your second question, I think really that just comes from creating a really good spiritual care guidelines. And that is just the consultation where you work with the local tribes and figure out and listen to them, and they will tell you what things are sacred, and then what they would like you, how they would like you to care for those objects. When something is, when we decide that something is considered sacred, we move it from general storage and put it into sort of a specialized sacred area. We don't show it to, general tours. We don't get in there unless we really have to. But I think the collections management side of that really will just follow your spiritual care guidelines, which just takes some time to develop.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
For someone who might be new to collections, what's the importance of having on the cloud, in a server, and then having paper copies?
What was that now? Sorry, I was looking at the chat.
If you're new to collections, what's the importance of having your collections records in so many different locations, paper copy, and also different locations?
Yeah, absolutely. So if something were to happen to our facility and all we had were paper copies, I mean, knock on wood, but say we had a fire and that cabinet, which is allegedly fireproof, but say it went up, we've got the copies on box. That same hypothetical emergency or, natural disaster might also ruin my local server where I have information stored. So that cloud server is really important. The flip side of that is, well, what if the cloud server, like, what if that gets, I don't know, like some bad actor gets it and is able to like blow up the system or something, internally and make everything disappear. Well, then we've still got our local server. We've still got our paper copies. So just having redundant copies as much as you can. The challenge though is keeping it updated everywhere. And I really have not found a perfect way to deal with that yet. I just kind of, I find little solutions that work when they work.
And then going off something Teal said, a lot of museums have objects that they don't have a lot of information about. So do you guys have a way of working with people to get more information and add that to your database?
That's a good question. You know what? One thing that we've done is, this has worked really well for like photo collections, is sometimes we'll do like a throwback Thursday or something and post a photo, and we may not know anything about the photo, but someone in the comments might be, that's my uncle and he's standing in front of the cannery, the Alutiiq cannery or something. And then we take that information and we add that to our database, to maybe not to the database, but to the photo catalog at least. And so we get information where we can. Maybe a researcher comes in and they are looking at photos and they tell us information. That happens quite a bit. So that is where we get information. If staff, if as staff looks at things and figures things out and gets more familiar with collections, we'll update records. That's kind of the best way we found to deal with it.
Yep.
My hand down now. Yeah, and to like expand on that too, one thing that I started doing, because that was another big question, is that my predecessors, there was 2 people in my position before me, and they ran the whole culture department, just a single person. And so the first person, she was an elder, did everything on paper. And the next person was expanding the department so much that she had very little time to correct any of the wrongs or really catch everything up to date. And so a lot of things that were on loan, like they have a loan expiration, and at that time we should be addressing this and like contacting that person. Well, here I am, and it's like this loan should have been readdressed in 2008. Well, what do I do now? Or, oh, hey, this person is like gone, they're dead, they don't have, you know. So one thing that I am doing now on loan paperwork, especially, but is listing like a secondary or tertiary contact as to who we can contact in the event that they die, or in the event that we cannot contact them, like they change their cell phone number, they move cities, or email's not working. I'm having a couple contacts there who we can contact, be like, hey, can you get us in contact with this person because of this reason? But then also in case they do pass on, and then we can ask that person like, who is going to care for this object? Are you going to now donate it to our museum, or do you want it back? Because we know that within families that there's no simple way to really pass those things on. But and then that has made some things easier. Or
Yeah.
I hope that it will make things easier for the future, although I do have to go through everything and figure that out. But adding that line into my own personal paperwork.
Yeah, and both of those things are things that I've struggled with as well. I'm constantly finding like, oh, that loan expired. Like, what's going on? What I've done is I've created a loan database, and I just have like each year at the bottom. And so like each year I go and I see, okay, 2026, what loans expire then? 2025, what loan? And then as I update loans, I push them further out. The thing about the loan form too, what we ended up doing a couple of years ago was adding a page at the very end of our loan form that's a disposition of property. And essentially when we are having people sign new loans, we're asking them to fill this last sheet out, and it essentially says, I know nobody wants to think about it, but in case you pass on or you're unable to we can't reach you, how would you like us to deal with your property? And we add the option to give to the museum, or this person is my heir. And that's what we've done. And it seems to work so far. We haven't had any like legal battles or anything about it yet. So that seems to be working. And it seems like that's kind of what you've done too. So.
Awesome. I think something was brought up that made me think, but my brain died. So, oh, the loan database that you were talking about, it's like a database of your database?
No, it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's something I would love. It's one of those things that like eventually I want to build into the CMS. But like I said, since we typically do these as grant funded projects, we just do little chunks at a time. And that's just not something. There is a field for you to add your loans and when they start and when they end. And as I add new items to our database, I do put that information in. But really, when it comes down to it, when I'm really trying to figure out where I am with my loans, I go to that flat file database. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. So uses for both types.
Yeah. And then the other question I was thinking is, so you know where all your objects are in your collections, what row they're on, what shelf they're on. Do you have like a map in your database, or is it just?
Yeah, I'll show you. I really like it actually. And I had all these tabs open, but I couldn't like toggle between screens. Let's see here. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Our storage locations. Yeah, great. And so we've got internal and external. So external just might be like where things are on exhibit or something like that. And then internal, we've got it divided because we also have our library database included in this collective access. So you can see if things are in the collections room, library, lab. So collections room, you can go to cabinet A1 and then drawer, shelf, whatever. And so what you can do actually, and I pulled up a report even to show you, but what you can do is you can run a report based on what objects are where. So right now I selected the rolling rack, and from there I can create a report that will then show me everything that is on there. And I did this in anticipation So this is the report that would generate. So you can get a nice little picture so you know what you're looking for. It gives you the name, it gives you the object identifier. So like if you're going to do, like I said, a spot inventory or something. Oh, it's not showing it, is it? There we go.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Really novice at the sharing screen. So sorry. And so this is a nice little report that will show you what you're looking for, show you the object identifier, and it should show the storage location. I don't know why. I must have done the report wrong, because normally it shows the storage location right here as well. So this is really useful. Also, like if you're creating exhibit object lists, this is a really good thing. If you know, I could provide this to our exhibits manager so she could go find the things that are going to go up in this particular wall or something like that. So those are really helpful.
And then it's important when you're moving things from the storage onto a rolling rack or onto exhibit to move it in the database as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a step that sometimes gets forgotten.
Yeah. So, I mean, I really love our database. There are lots of modules that we don't use. Like I mentioned earlier with the archive, like if you are like an archive heavy institution, there's really a lot that you can do with this here. Okay. So you can create an archive and you can do like the series and the sub-series and the file and have your whole archive finding aid essentially right here. Like I said, it's not really something that we use, but if we were a more archive heavy institution, we would.
Mm-hmm. And then everything that you've been doing with collective access, is that now available for other people to use that type of tool? Do you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how the open source stuff works, is like it's all open source and free to use, but it has that, you know, the copyright where it's like it then becomes available for everyone else to use as well. I'm not sure how that works. Like if somebody wanted our exact system, I don't know like how they would get that if they just went to Whirligig that kind of thing is like sort of beyond, once you get into the really techie stuff like coding and things like that, I'm kind of lost, but yes, it should be available to anyone.
Oh, wow. So if someone wanted to do a similar database.
That's my understanding. Yeah. Like that's how open source stuff works. So that's what I was told when we did our system.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to make sure, Diane, did you have any questions before we end this?
What we use is Past Perfect. Have you worked with it, and what's your opinion?
Yeah, we used Past Perfect when I first started. It was a very old version. I have not used any of the new versions, but I've seen people that use them and really like it. Like the Past Perfect web version, I think is really popular. I have not used that version, so I can't really speak to that.
Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people do use it.
Yeah. It's kind of, I think it's kind of one of the more popular programs.
Yeah, we first got it back in, I think it was 2000. And so we had the first version and we updated it last year. You know, mostly we're happy with it. We haven't tried any other system.
Do you know if it's a cloud version?
No, it's not a cloud version.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you need any help with Past Perfect, I can connect you to other organizations that are using it if you wanted to ask any questions.
All right.
Sorry, I can't be more help on that one.
I know a lot of people use it though, so there's plenty of people in Alaska who can help. Awesome. Well, this was great. I learned a lot, and hopefully everyone else did too. And then we'll be posting it for everyone who couldn't make it. I know we switched the time on them, so maybe something happened there. But I know it's really interesting and helpful for a lot of people, because I know a lot of people really come to Alaska and start museum jobs, and this kind of baseline knowledge is so important. So yeah, thank you. Let me stop the recording.
Yeah, had a great time.